On July 26, 1974, a 12-year-old girl was walking her dog through the dunes near Race Point at the very tip of Cape Cod. The dog began to bark. It pulled her towards something half hidden in the sand and scrub grass. What she found there would haunt the coast of Massachusetts for nearly half a century: the body of a woman, nude, face down on a beach blanket, her head crushed, her hands missing. No identification, no name. No one came forward to claim her. For 48 years, she was known only as the Lady of the Dunes. And the answer, when it finally came, revealed not just who she was, but the kind of man she had married. This is the story of Ruth Marie Terry, Cape Cod. To understand what happened here, you need to understand this place. Cape Cod is a long, curving arm of sand and scrub pine that reaches out from the southeastern coast of Massachusetts into the Atlantic Ocean. It bends northward in a distinctive hook shape, and at its very tip sits Provincetown, a small, isolated community of artists, fishermen, and summer visitors. In 1974, the year-round population was roughly 3,500. In summer, that number swelled to tens of thousands. People came for the beaches, the galleries, the whale watches, the raw and untamed beauty of the Outer Cape. But the landscape itself carried a weight that tourists rarely felt. The Cape Cod National Seashore, established in 1961, protects 40 miles of coastline, marshes, ponds, and rolling dunes. Race Point at the northern tip of Provincetown is one of the most remote stretches of beach on the eastern seaboard. The dunes there are towering formations of sand, shaped by centuries of wind and tide. Scrub pine and beach grass cling to their slopes. In 1974, the area was even more isolated than it is today. The access roads were sandy and often impassable. A person could walk a few hundred yards from the road and disappear entirely from view. It was the kind of place where solitude was absolute, where a body could lie undiscovered for weeks. The Outer Cape had already known darkness. Between 1969 and 1970, a serial killer named Anton Costa had murdered and dismembered at least 4 young women in the nearby town of Truro. Costa was convicted in 1970 and died by suicide in prison on May 12, 1974, just 2 months before the Lady of the Dunes was found. The memory of those crimes still hung over the region like salt air. The idea that something terrible could happen in those beautiful, lonely dunes was not abstract. It had already been proven true. Ruth Marie Terry was born on September 8, 1936, in Whitwell, Tennessee, a small town in Marion County tucked into the mountains of the southeastern part of the state. She was described by those who knew her as a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a wife, and a mother. Her mother, Eva Terry, died when she was young at just 23 years old. Ruth grew up in rural Tennessee during the years following World War II, in a landscape of small towns, church steeples, and hardscrabble families making do with what they had. In 1957, at the age of 21, Ruth left Tennessee. She traveled north to Livonia, Michigan, and took a job at a Fisher Body automotive assembly plant. It was factory work, honest and grueling, and it was a long way from the mountains of Marion County. In 1958, she gave birth to a son. But Ruth was struggling financially, and she made a decision that must have torn her apart. She allowed her workplace superintendent, Richard Hanchett Sr., and his wife to adopt the baby. The child was named Richard Hanchett Jr. Ruth walked away from her son, not because she did not love him, but because she believed she could not provide for him. That decision would echo through the decades in ways no one could have predicted. After giving up her son, Ruth relocated to California. She spent the 1960s and early 1970s there, living her life out of sight of her Tennessee family. In 1972, she reconnected with her son Richard after he recovered from a drug overdose. It was a fragile reunion, a mother and son reaching across years of separation towards something that might have become healing. Then, on February 16, 1974, Ruth Marie Terry married Guy Muldavin in Reno, Nevada. She was 37 years old. She could not have known what she was walking into. Guy Muldavin was born on October 27, 1923. He was an antiques dealer, or so he said. He was also, at various points in his life, a disc jockey, an aspiring actor, a professor, a radio host, and an executive at a silver store in Beverly Hills. He had attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City in 1942. He was charming. He was articulate. Acquaintances described him as a charming rascal. A bunco artist. He married at least 5 times. He used aliases. He moved through the world with the easy confidence of a man who had learned early that people will believe whatever you tell them as long as you say it with a smile. But behind the charm was something monstrous. In June of 1950, in Humboldt County, California, a 28-year-old bread truck driver named Henry Lawrence Baird was shot in the head and found naked on a beach near Table Bluff. His body was resting on a pile of neatly folded women's clothing belonging to a 17-year-old waitress named Barbara Jo Kelly. Kelly had last been seen on June 17th with Baird. She was never found. Muldavin was the prime suspect. He was never charged. 1958, Muldavin married Manzanita Aileen Ryan in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Ryan had an 18-year-old daughter named Dolores Ann Mearns. On April 1st, 1960, both Manzanita and Dolores vanished from their home in Seattle. They were never seen again. Muldavin became the primary suspect. Within months of the disappearance, he filed for divorce from Manzanita on the grounds of desertion. He married another woman. Left Seattle under an assumed name, calling himself Michael Strong. He underwent rhinoplasty in New York City, changing his appearance. The FBI arrested him for unlawful flight to avoid testimony. When investigators searched the Seattle property, they found dismembered human remains in the septic tank. Flesh, hair, bone fragments. But the forensic science of 1960 was not advanced enough to conclusively identify the remains. Muldavin was convicted only of larceny for swindling his mother-in-law out of $10,000. He received a 15-year sentence, which was suspended in March of 1962 with a repayment condition. He walked free, he moved on, he kept marrying women, and women kept disappearing or dying. True crime writer Ann Rule devoted sections of her 2007 book, Smoke, Mirrors, and Murder, to the case of Manzanita and Dolores. She recognized the pattern. A charming man, a trusting woman, a disappearance, a flimsy excuse, and then silence. This was the man Ruth Marie Terry married in February of 1974. 6 months later, she was dead. Family members who saw Ruth and Muldavin together noticed that she was not herself around him. She seemed diminished. He was controlling. The couple visited Ruth's family in Whitwell, Tennessee, approximately 4 months before her death. They spoke about plans to travel across America sourcing antiques and to visit Massachusetts. It sounded like an adventure. It was a death sentence. In late summer of 1974, Guy Muldavin returned to Tennessee alone. He was driving what investigators later determined was Ruth's vehicle. He told people his wife had died. He offered no details. He left quickly. Ruth's brother, James, was troubled enough to hire a private investigator who reported that all of Ruth's belongings had been sold and suggested she had joined a religious cult. The family did not know what to believe. Some theorized she had entered witness protection. Others simply waited, year after year, for Ruth to come home. She never did, because by then her body was lying in the dunes at Race Point, 1 mile east of the ranger station, on the most remote stretch of beach in Massachusetts. The scene the investigators found on July 26, 1974, was both brutal and eerily composed. Ruth's body was positioned face down on half of a beach blanket. Her head rested on a pair of folded Wrangler jeans. A blue bandana lay nearby. Her long auburn hair was pulled back into a ponytail secured by a gold-flecked elastic band. Her toenails were painted pink. She appeared to have been lying in the sun, as if she had been sharing the blanket with a companion. But the injuries told a different story. The left side of her skull had been crushed by a single devastating blow consistent with a military entrenching tool. Her head was nearly severed from her body. Both hands and one forearm had been removed, presumably to prevent identification through fingerprints. There were signs of post-mortem sexual assault. No weapon was found at the scene. 2 sets of footprints led to the body. Tire tracks were discovered approximately 50 yards away. There was no sign of a struggle. Investigators theorized that Ruth either knew her killer or was asleep when the first blow landed. Given what we now know about Guy Muldavin, both possibilities are equally terrible. She trusted him. He was her husband. And he killed her in a place so remote that it took approximately 2 weeks for anyone to find her. She was 37 years old. She had expensive dental work, crowns, and multiple extractions valued at between $5,000 and $10,000. She was 5 feet 6.5 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall, approximately 145 pounds, with an athletic build. She had been someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother, and now she was a Jane Doe on a beach in Provincetown. The investigation began immediately, but it was crippled from the start. Without hands, there were no fingerprints. Without a face, there was no recognition. The dental work was distinctive, but it could not be matched to any known missing person. Investigators canvassed neighborhoods. They reviewed thousands of missing person reports from across the country. They distributed descriptions and composite sketches. None of it led anywhere. The fundamental problem was isolation. Not the isolation of the dunes, but the isolation of Ruth Marie Terry's life. She had lived in multiple states. She had cut ties with her family. Her relatives in Tennessee did not know she was in Massachusetts. Her son Richard, given up for adoption 16 years earlier, did not know where she was. The man who killed her, her own husband, had told everyone she had simply died, and no one pressed him on the details. Ruth Marie Terry had fallen through every crack in the system, and the system had too many cracks to count. The body was buried in St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown in October of 1974. She was given a grave, but not a name. A clay facial reconstruction was created in 1979, the sculptor's attempt to give shape to the face that had been taken from her. The case went cold. Over the next 4 decades, investigators refused to let the Lady of the Dunes be forgotten. Her body was exhumed in 1980 for further examination. The skull was removed and kept for continued analysis. No new leads emerged. In 1981, a woman reported seeing someone resembling the victim in the company of infamous Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger around the time of the presumed death. Bulger was known for extracting his victim's teeth to prevent identification, but no proven connection was ever established. In 2000, the body was exhumed again for DNA testing. A suspect named Rory Jean Kessinger was investigated, but his mother's DNA did not match the victim. Another dead end. Convicted serial killer Hadden Clark confessed to the murder from prison. He sent letters with drawings of a handless naked woman and a map to the discovery location. But Clark had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and authorities considered his confessions unreliable. In 2010, Connecticut imaging of the skull was performed. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children generated a new facial reconstruction. In 2013, the body was exhumed for a 3rd time. Each exhumation represented renewed hope, renewed determination, and the stubborn refusal of investigators to accept that this woman would remain nameless forever. Then, in 2015, an unexpected theory emerged. Writer Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, noted that a woman visible in the 4th of July beach scene in the 1975 film Jaws appeared to be wearing a blue bandana and jeans matching items found at the crime scene. The film had been shot on Martha's Vineyard, approximately 100 miles south of Provincetown, between May and October of 1974, overlapping with the estimated time of death. Some investigators expressed interest. Others dismissed it as wild speculation. The theory was never proven. The breakthrough came in 2022. Skeletal remains were sent to Othram Incorporated, a forensic laboratory in Houston, Texas, that specializes in what is called forensic-grade genome sequencing. Othram scientists built a comprehensive DNA profile from the decades-old remains. That profile was then used to search public genealogy databases, where ordinary citizens had voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestry research. The system identified partial matches with distant relatives. FBI agents and genealogists built family trees, working through generations, narrowing the field. And here the story takes a turn that no one could have predicted. Ruth Marie Terry's son, Richard Hanchett Jr., the child she had given up for adoption in 1958, had taken a DNA test through a consumer genealogy service. That test had connected him to Ruth's family in Tennessee, who had been searching for her for decades. And now that same DNA connection helped investigators confirm the identity of the Lady of the Dunes. On October 31st, 2022, the FBI field office in Boston made the announcement. The Lady of the Dunes had been identified as Ruth Marie Terry, 37 years old, of Tennessee. She was described as a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a wife, and a mother. The case represented the oldest unidentified homicide victim in Massachusetts history. After 48 years, 3 months, and 5 days, she had her name back. The woman who had been reduced to a nickname, a mystery, a set of forensic details on an evidence sheet, was finally a person again. But the story was not over. Investigators now had a victim. They needed a killer. and the trail led directly to the man she had married 6 months before her death. Massachusetts State Police investigators traced the marriage records. Ruth Terry had married Guy Muldavin in early 1974. The couple had traveled together that summer. Muldavin had returned alone, driving Ruth's vehicle. He had told people his wife had died. His history of violence against wives and female companions, from the suspected murders in Humboldt County in 1950 to the disappearances in Seattle in 1960, established a clear and damning behavioral pattern. This was a man who married women and killed them. On August 28, 2023, Cape and Islands District Attorney Robert J. Galabois made the official announcement. Based on the investigation into the death of Miss Terry, it has been determined that Mr. Muldavin was responsible for Miss Terry's death in 1974. There would be no trial, no conviction, no formal accounting in a court of law. Guy Muldavin had died on March 14, 2002 in Salinas, California. He had lived to the age of 78. In his final years, he had retired from his position at a Beverly Hills silver store, volunteered at a radio station in Pacific Grove, and hosted a 3-hour weekly show about aging, growing, and making transitions. He worked at a tobacco shop in Carmel. He wrote a book. He lived a quiet life by the ocean while Ruth Marie Terry lay in an unmarked grave on Cape Cod. He had never been charged with any murder. Not Ruth Marie Terry, not Manzanita Ryan, not Dolores Mearns, not Henry Baird, not Barbara Jo Kelly. A man suspected in the violent deaths of at least 5 people died of natural causes. Surrounded by the ordinary comforts of old age, while his victims' families spent decades wondering what had happened to the people they loved. Richard Hanchett Jr., Ruth's son, spoke about the identification. He said, "I wish I could have just talked to her, touched her once." About Muldavin, he said, "The fact that he touched my mom kills me. But the fact that he got away with it makes me angrier than anything." Ruth Marie Terry was born on September 8, 1936, in Whitwell, Tennessee. She grew up without her mother. She worked in a factory in Michigan. She gave up her son because she loved him too much to let him struggle. She moved to California. She reconnected with that son years later, reaching across an ocean of time and separation. She married a man who told her they would travel together and see the world. She went to Massachusetts. She lay down on a beach blanket in the dunes at Race Point, at the very tip of Cape Cod, in a place where the sky meets the Atlantic and the sand stretches in every direction. And someone she trusted took her life. For 48 years, the dunes kept her secret. The wind moved the sand. The tides rose and fell. The tourists came and went. And through it all, she lay in St. Peter's Cemetery with no name on her grave, while investigators exhumed her body again and again, refusing to give up, refusing to let her be forgotten. It was a son she gave away who brought her back. A DNA test taken for personal reasons, a connection to a family in Tennessee, a thread that wound its way through decades of silence and loss until it reached a laboratory in Texas and an FBI field office in Boston. And finally, the Lady of the Dunes had a name: Ruth Marie Terry, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a woman who deserved better than what the world gave her. If you or someone you know has information about an unsolved crime, please contact your local law enforcement agency. Tips can make the difference between a case going cold and a family finding the answers they deserve. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this video with others. These cases deserve to be remembered, and the victims deserve to have their stories told.